Hello guys, this is a video I did not believe I would be making or that I would be making this early. Now I was making several videos educational about 3D printing. I was about to release them on YouTube, and this came as a shock to me. Now I was always aware about the issues with ghost guns. And for those that don't know what a ghost gun is, it's a gun that's manufactured in such a way that it avoids persecution. It doesn't have identifiers. So in the case of an illegal activity, the police or FBI or in your country, whatever is the authorities, the relevant authorities, they have a hard time with it is functionally impossible to detect who the maker and user is. Now, in our screens, we are seeing House Bill 2321. That's is a floor bill. That's not yet a law, but it is under discussion. And I will put a link to the relevant website that I download the PDF version of that bill, and I will read through the bill step by step. It's gonna be a little bit of a long video because I have a lot of questions and a lot of worries when I'm reading this bill. Now, to be fair, when I first heard about this bill and I basically skimmed it like a week ago, I did not realize how bad it is because I just read through it and I didn't take any notes. And when I did that a couple of days ago, and I sat down and I said, okay, let's see what this bill suggests. There are a lot of questions and a lot of worries if this becomes law in this form. Now, I want to preface this with two pieces of information. I am not American. I do not live in America. I am a European. Uh, so this doesn't necessarily, at a very surface first glance, affect me. But as I will go through my analysis, it, it damn right does. And the second part is that 3D printing is a thing in most of the world. Even in very poor areas, you will still find enthusiasts and groups that do a lot of things, that do 3D printing as a service. That it's a very creative process, almost like video making. Everyone can do this, and so a lot of people across the world do this. Now, while there is an issue with ghost guns, there are people who do this small subsection of the community. I have personally the feeling, and that may be an anecdote, that the problems with firearm violence really is more of an American thing and not of the rest of the world. Um, Americans do love their guns. It is your right, guys. This is how you want to organize your society, and that's okay. But that being said, when you are in a country where you have easier access to weapons, when more people have more weapons and they sometimes have access to them even from somewhat younger ages. If you are a teen, if you are a young adult, and you have very, very trivial ways to access weapons, this can create situations and criminality, gun crime, that is really not characteristic of other societies. And so I'm a gun control supporter. Uh, I find it somewhat problematic if you have that much access to weapons, but then again, I do not think this law even does this correctly, and I do not think it's going to address it because uh, you are trying to stop drunk driving by basically installing a breathalyzer into every car rather than trying to stop the bad actors. And this is a problem for all of us. So I have underlined certain things. I have highlighted them actually, not underlined. I will be reading each passage that I have underlined, and I have made some notes that are troubling me. And I believe if this law doesn't get amended or changed drastically, or certain things um, clarified, this is gonna be an issue. And so let's begin. So we start off immediately. Let's read together. An act relating to preventing the unlawful manufacturing of firearms by requiring three-dimensional printers be equipped with certain blocking technologies. Adding a new chapter. Okay. What is my issue here? First things, this is gonna cause increased, and you see my note, I think you see my notes here. If you don't, it's alright. This is gonna increase the cost of printers for all of us. First of all, for the Americans, and it's easy to understand, if you are selling 3D printers in America, you are probably, if you are manufacturing of an equipment, you are probably gonna choose the trims that are minimally required to be legal to be sold at. So you will have, for instance, your motherboards, the 3D printer motherboard equipped with some kind of chip that is not easy to remove, that acts as this physical switch. This is gonna increase the cost for all of us, and I think it's also gonna probably increase the cost for Europeans, because if you are a company that you are making hardware, you're making printers, and you want to be compliant, it may be more expensive to have 2 3 different trims for Europe, for America, for Asia, or wherever, or Australia, against having a single trim and you just have a chip that's turned on and off. And this could increase that cost for all of us, even if you are decreasing the profit margin in other countries. And this also can cause down the line the ability of companies to reinvest and innovate may be reduced. So even if it doesn't cause an immediate increase in price, down the line, you may see a slowing down of innovation in the field. It's because there is increased compliance cost, which means that if you have a bucket of how much is this piece of equipment uh, cost, how much this equipment gonna cost me to make versus how much I can reasonably sell it within a market, that gap, that profit margin gets shrunk, and you may start to reap away future development to make sure that your equipment doesn't become too expensive to make. It also hinders and imposes a cost on all of us for a small subset of people. There are guys in forums, in groups, in various social media, on other places that may be trading those kinds of things, or they may be at the very least talking and arranging trades in between themselves. If you've been in the space any amount of time, you have seen that. Now, in a lot of countries, trading files, especially for firearms, that to make replacement parts, can be at times either a restricted activity or illegal, like you are getting fine or jail sentence, and this is in a lot of countries. So there is this subset of people, but they are a small minority, but everyone is getting a cost. Again, it's like there are some people who are gonna drink and then drive, but that doesn't mean that tomorrow, to reduce this problem, we're gonna install a breathalyzer into every car. There are ways outside of this that are not really infringing on a reasonable degree of privacy and freedom. What is also gonna become clear is that I think the timeline and how ready the system is a little bit fuzzy. Now, the timeline is rather short. Supposedly, this is gonna be up and running in 2 years. Now, and we'll see this later on, the way this technology solution is being described, it sounds as probably gonna be a much larger time frame to develop it. And because certain criteria haven't been set in numerical limits, saying this process has to be successful 80% of the time, this can create, in my opinion, a hidden cost that it's of time. If we don't know how successful that process is, we cannot really determine the cost, the opportunity cost of time lost by hobbies, by professionals, by developing companies. A process that is 100% successful, for instance, it always detects those uses. It does so very fast, very cheaply, and it doesn't really have any false positives. Is an entirely different discussion than a process that has 90% uh, um, rate of recognizing the problematic prints, but the other 10% of those positive matches may be false. That could be a massive issue depending on what the action afterwards is, and depending on how long the process is and how expensive it is, both for you the user or the hobbyist and for the state. It may actually create massive black holes because operationally it's a very expensive thing. And Alex, the operation really, as we analyze it, is going to become even more clear just how big that cost can reasonably be, even if it is catching everyone, every bad guy, so to speak. If we were to say that someone who prints their firearms and firearm parts is a bad guy, I will not really attest to this. So let's go to the next highlighted section. Equipped with blocking features means a three-dimensional printer has integrated a software controls process. That's probably software plus hardware. A software controls process that deploys a firearms blueprint detection algorithm such that those features identify and reject print requests for firearms or illegal firearm parts with a high degree of reliability and cannot be overridden or otherwise defeated by a user with significant technical skills. So I have multiple problems with this passage. To begin with, a lot of older equipment are not necessarily always online. They don't always have online connectivity. I still have my Ender 3, and the only way you could theoretically install things to have it, to allow it to have some kind of connectivity either with my PC or some kind of LAN connectivity. But generally speaking, I would put an SD card, I would load in the stuff, the G code into the SD, and then I would print it locally. The way this sounds, it implies you would have to physically install a piece of hardware that you cannot remove, like a chip, onto the motherboard that does this comparison. Now, what is the high degree of reliability? We don't know. 90 to 99 is, it may sound a little, it's a lot actually. It also, it's bothersome for me because depending on your equipment, the printer may not have the processing capability to do this job on a reasonable time scale. Most printers do not have so much memory that they can do all this. That's why you are doing your slicing in your machine versus having all of it done in your printer. What happens if you have to do very computationally heavy processes in your printer as well? I do not see this. And even if you have some kind of situation in which you have a chip that is having some kind of Wi-Fi connectivity, you are sending the G code to some cloud service that is comparing it with a database, depending on the size of the database, depending on the connectivity quality, the speed of your upload speed, the size of your file, and some 3D printed files can get really big, really complicated, and therefore really, really heavy to be read, even and to be uploaded. This could add tens of minutes to your um, to your 3D print jobs, and especially if there is a false negative, a false positive, and try to get around this because maybe the orientation played a role into how this is read. This may add too much time in menial activities, and which is a hidden cost, which actually may start killing the hobby and the business altogether. I also am troubled is how are you gonna do the post to the legacy equipment, the post installation. If your printer doesn't come with a pre-installed kill switch, you're gonna have a bunch of printers that are gonna have to be recalled, and you're gonna have, in my opinion, to buy them back from the customer. You have to pay all those people, whether hobbyists or professionals, whose equipment you've rendered illegal with the pretext that they may be gun makers or illicit gun makers. You have to pay them. You do not get to take someone else's private property by or reduce its capabilities by saying you could be breaking the law. I'm probably not. So yeah, that is not that that is a kind of works, and I'm not seeing anything in this bill as to how this is gonna be dealt with. Um, Again, is it gonna be an always online thing or is it gonna be a local thing? And if you have, by the way, that's the least possible. If you have the future printers that are gonna be created, if they have to have a localized, um, so to speak, library to use as ways to compare and contrast, well, you want to reduce the spread of illegal firearms, ghost guns, and you're gonna create something that could be potentially reverse engineered to give access to a bunch of files. I don't know how this is gonna work. I don't think it's gonna work this way. But it is because we do not see the technique right now. This is a little bit too much in the air, and the framework is really fast. If this was a 10-year plan, I could say, okay, in 10 years, maybe they come up with solutions. But no, this means that by 2027, they need to be rolling with this. So I'm a little bit worried. How is this gonna happen? I hope that there will be more communication with. We've had the software ready, we have the hardware ready, we have tested. Those are the benchmarks, and we know what's in the cards. I do not see that here, and maybe that's how laws are made. I'm not an legal expert, but if you're making a business plan, I would be asking all those questions because those are massive holes that you could fall right through them. Okay, so I haven't forgot anything here. So here we go to the next paragraph that I've highlighted. Firearms blueprint detection algorithm means a software service that evaluates, again, service. I'm assuming this means some kind of cloud service. It probably is going to be slicer end, it's going to be printer end, it's going to be a little bit of both. I really don't know what they mean. That evaluates three-dimensional printing files, whether in the form of stereolithography files or other computer-aided design files or geometric code, to determine if they can be used to program a three-dimensional printer to produce a firearm or illegal firearm parts, and flag any such files to prevent their use to manufacture a said firearm or illegal firearm parts. I have multiple issues. So again, it is gonna be machine side, slicer side, or both. How long is the comparison going to be? Depending on how the process and the workflow is, that can be an actually very long process. In slicer level, it may be faster, but if it's on printer side, it may be longer. And if you have to do in both of them, this can be extremely long. And you also have the problem of flagging. After you flag a file, what happens? Are the authorities being, for instance, at the very least notified that something is wrong here? Please check the file. What is the process from their side? Do we have a human verifying that yes, this is potentially an illegal part or not? We don't. It's not clear here. And by the way, that basically impacts you even if you're a hobbyist. So depending on how successful and how invasive the system is going to be, this may be you. And let's say you have a file that has been misflagged and you know it. And how do you resolve this? Can you have do you have to delete the file and recompile it, reinsert it into your slicer? You have to have a way out of this, because if this algorithm, whether it's slicer or machine side, and it gets stuck and it flags something, depending on how easy it is to beat or not, if it has a high level of false positives, you are going to be having issues. Do I pick up the phone and call my local police precinct and say, guys, I'm this and this file has been flagged. I'm pretty sure this is a mistake because this is not some weapon part, or if there is any approximation to it, really it is not intended. And to the point I went before, different people may have different levels of acclimatization with what is a firearm part. So a lot of people may not be able to recognize every part, and if you're gonna 3D print a gun, you're probably doing this in pieces. So what happens if someone cannot even recognize what the problem is? Does everything look like everything else? Like, I get the effort here, but there has to be more clarity to ascertain whether or not it's going to be a successful build or not. Then we have the next part. Illegal firearm parts means an unfinished frame. Okay, frame and receiver, you can kind of understand, you can see them. They are very hard to miss. As that term is defined, an unfinished frame or receiver, sorry, as that term is defined in RCW 9.41.010, or any part designed and intended solely and exclusively for use in converting a weapon into a machine gun. What does that mean? Again, if you are on the know, if you are a gun enthusiast and you make parts, you kind of understand what it means. But I know I have used guns. I've served in the military, and I'm not certain that anyone I know who's in this hobby has, probably most haven't, or that they could recognize certain pieces. And this doesn't. This is where my problem is. This is a little bit vague, and this could be a problem. So, again, and people again do 3D printing as a service. So, what happens if I get a file from someone that says, okay, guys, this is for a replacement piece for this machine. I do not recognize that this is a firearm part. It gets successfully flagged, and I'm having a knock on my door. This can get hairy, especially if the law recognizes that just having it is a finable offense. That can have certain implications. Yes, you could easily say this is the email, this is the file that I was sent, but again, this could be problematic, especially for smaller shops and smaller companies. Even large ones are going to have problem with this because I think it's a little bit too generic. Then we go to the next part, the paragraph number 7. So, three-dimensional printer means any machine capable of rendering a three-dimensional object from a digital design file using additive manufacturing. Okay, that is accurate. B. Any machine capable of making three-dimensional modifications to an object from a digital design file using subtractive machining. So CNC lathes. What the fuck? There are a lot of small shops that may be using legacy equipment, especially with CNC, because they can get really expensive, that may be at times even not actively supported by a company, that will face a law that potentially renders them illegal or borderline legal. They are basically an audit away from getting fined. And because of the way that this is worded, it implies that they will have to have some kind of thing installed that is difficult to remove on their own. And probably there's gonna be there's gonna be need from either the companies, the original makers who did those lathes and CNC machines and 3D prints to develop all those things. And if not recall, there has to be a cost to install those parts. Is the state or the country gonna shoulder those costs, because they can be considerable? And the other thing is it even physically possible? I do not really know. So if you are a small shop owner, your only maybe solution may be going and taking out the firearms license, which you never intend to use, just to be covered by this. But this is extremely unfair. Even if that license is $100 and you can take it out in 5 hours online, why pay that? You are being painted as a potential criminal, and you are forced to take a license that you're never going to use, that you may even not intend it to do, immediately, just to avoid even larger costs. Now you can be compliant, and you should be compliant, but this is bureaucracy that really doesn't really make sense. I've seen those kinds of laws in other places that they are in effect creating costs for businesses that are pointless, that are unfair. It's unfair for you to have to shoulder a cost for someone else's criminal activity, and it's unfair to create a system by which the only possible way for the companies and the individuals, the privates who are involved, is having to pay the government money for things they don't need just to avoid a fine. That's too much. That's an overstep by the legislators, I think, because it creates a de facto situations which the cheapest solution may be just go get a license, whatever that's gonna entail, just to avoid having to deal with this. And this is stupid, very stupid, actually. I do not have any better words to describe this. Now we go to section 2. This chapter applies to persons that conduct business in Washington or produce parts or services that are sold. I'm somewhat okay here up until this point, or otherwise transferred to residents of Washington. So we live in a very globalized economy. It's a very open thing. It's not the medieval century in which it is difficult to conceive selling your stuff to another city. The way this works, and I may be wrong because I'm not a legal expert, it almost implies that you have to be compliant with this, even if you are not directly selling in Washington, because this otherwise transfer to residents of Washington. If I sell a stuff to you, and especially if you give me another address, I really don't know what you're gonna do then. If you were to tell me that I know for a fact this is gonna be transferred in Washington, then I could argue this is some level of conspiracy, like I'm sending that stuff to a PO box in New York, and you're going to take it, and you're going to take it to Washington. But this creates issues. What happens if there is some guy, he's a reseller, okay, he buys things that he pretends that they are something else from Arkansas, okay, to a New York company, and then sells those parts as a middleman to Washington? Is the guy in Arkansas to be held criminally liable? I don't know. This doesn't really this is probably going to create a situation in which I wouldn't be very confident to sell stuff in America. I maybe extreme here, but if the businesses in Washington that are physically present, that they have to follow those rules, I would be okay. It's a weird law, but whatever. But the way this is worded, it expands the scope a little bit too much for my liking. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legislator, but this may be just how normally laws are written. But this sounds to be a little expansive. And when we are dealing with so many costs, and this process is going to have a lot of costs, I think you have to be particular. We go to section 3. As you see, guys, I've highlighted quite a lot of things. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being a little bit hyperbolic or stupid. I do not think so. So, sorry for that. I'm slightly frustrated. So, after July 1, 2027, no person who manufactures, wholesales, or sells any three-dimensional printer may sell or otherwise transfer for consideration a three-dimensional printer in this state unless the three-dimensional printer is equipped with blocking features that prevent the printer from printing firearms and illegal firearm parts. And I won't call back to the fact that those blocking features cannot be easily defeatable. So it's not like you can have some kind of flash drive that you stick into your machine and then it works. It has to be something that is difficult to remove, which means that if you are a maker or a reseller and you have legacy equipment, unless there is a recall and a replacement, which will, in my opinion, in this situation, the state should burden, if not all, the vast majority of the cost of that process, because it's not fair for the companies and the people involved to be essentially treated as criminals to possibly criminals and being collectively fined. This is a fine, even if it's not directly a fine. If you have to spend so much money post fact to be compliant, to carry this financial burden if they want to do this. Because let's say if you are a small reseller, okay, and you have a shop with 3D printers, with paraphernalia, with filament, that's a very typical thing. Depending on where you are in this process, you may be forced to start dumping your hardware sooner or later. Because after 27, it's gonna be illegal to sell it. If you go out of business, it may be a complication. Those are somewhat difficult things. Again, this is not some kind of gun recall of illegal weapons or weapons that are not, that there is an expired license and maybe you forgot to expire and you don't want to get in trouble. This is taking something that could potentially make some illegal parts of it and to criminalize an entire branch of our economy. That's a little bit weird. And this could kill and cause some small resellers to die out and be killed, which could down the road increase the cost for all of us because there is such a thing as acquisition cost of a customer. If only the big guys survive, maybe even they are gonna be strained for money because suddenly you won't have all those people who help you push the product. There is a reason companies use resellers. They're not stupid, and typically that may be that the cost of getting stuff out into various markets may be different for large entities than there are for smaller entities. But the way this law is made, it's potentially going to start killing small businesses. And if you factor in the fact that you may have equipment that's more expensive to buy and has tighter profit margins, and it may be more clunky to use because the process slows it down, well, what you get? You get more expensive equipment that does worse, that has a worse performance overall. That's really not worth it in terms of the monetary thing. So some people are going to be um, dis, uh, discouraged from even buying printers. And what that does do is it further reduce profit margin because profit margins are not stationary, they are dynamic. If you have a very large and very vibrant community of buyers and sellers and professionals and hobbies, it's easier to find customers. If this um, market shrinks because you have rising costs and reduced capabilities, this market is going to become more expensive to acquire new customers, and they be more apprehensive to spend money. So this could the market dynamics that we develop due to this regulation. While I may be Cassandra here, I'm maybe talking about the end of the world. It may actually start to completely degrowth this part of the economy to prevent a very small subset of makers to do some illicit stuff. Is the juice worth the squeeze? I don't know. The next part I have wrong. The 3-dimensional printer is equipped with blocking features that prevent the printer from printing firearms and illegal firearm parts. Again, the way this worded, it tells us it's going to be something that's difficult to remove, that's going to be physically attached to the printer, or it's going to be loaded as a software that's difficult to remove. And the logistics of it are unclear. If you have to do certain demanding processes on the printer end, that may increase the time quite a lot. And nowhere in this legislation there is a discussion of who is going to shoulder the cost. The way I see it, it's basically the ball is being sneakily pitched to the companies and to the individuals. And it's easy to make some generic plans, but you have there has to be a cost understanding of what you are asking from companies and people. And based up until this, and we will see later that this process, because it's not being clearly delineated, depending on how it's going to be, it may be expensive, very expensive, by the way. So here, what I said before, if you want to avoid all this, you may just have to take out a firearms manufacturing license, which means that if you are a buyer outside of America, I really don't know what's the legal framework, because if effectively buyers from outside of America are they will not ever be prosecuted just because they are so far away, so no one is gonna hold them accountable. You are now making manufacturing overseas more competitive by creating legal hurdles that the local guys cannot easily overtake. And again, why force people to take out the manufacturing license that they don't need? Because this is what you are doing. If there isn't a good solution that financially makes sense, this is what's going to happen. And again, if you are a small company, or if you have this doing on the side to make some extra bucks, you may be out of business right now, depending on, I don't know how expensive this license is. And again, why? Even if it's $5, why? The state shouldn't be forcing you to spend money you don't need to spend to avoid some distinct and small problems, especially if there are better solutions. So, sorry. Here I have a lot of issues. That's page 4. So it starts from here, from section 6. For the purpose of this chapter, a software controls process satisfies the blocking features requirement only if it effectively rejects print requests for firearms or illegal firearm parts with a high degree of reliability, and if it prevents a user with significant technical skill from bypassing a digital firearm manufacturing code detection algorithm and thereby subverting the software controls process. Again, the way this worded means that it's going to be something that it's not going to be a flash drive you just remove and your printer works fine, because if we reduce that to this, then this bill is pointless. Okay, I wouldn't be happy, but it is a pointless discussion to have. But I have issues here because what is the confidence rate, how high the degree of reliability, and how many false positives, because those can have issues. Because of the wording, is it going to be a recall of older and legacy equipment, maybe a rebate to people who have bought an Ender 3, 5, 6, 10 years ago, and they've been on this hobby and they have it. What's that going to do? If it's only on the slicer side, it's probably going to be somewhat pointless, because a lot of legacy and newer equipment have SD card slots, which could mean actually that you remove the SD card slot so you don't have a physical way to add, for the newer printers, to add your files to your printer. But this creates a problem that if there is a Wi-Fi problem, or if you simply do not want your files to be um, shared through the net, if you are a company doing prototyping, for instance, um, you may have an issue. Again, you can set up a LAN network, okay, but having alternatives is a good thing. Not everyone is a potential criminal, and we shouldn't be treated as such. Here, software controls process may be integrated into a three-dimensional printer function in any of the following design forms, and that's my biggest gripe here. Now, if this was a proposition, not a proposition, a law proposition that had a very an out there time frame, it wasn't 2 years, because you're gonna see later on, it's 2 years for the hardware to be prepared, but it's 1 year for a database, and I will explain. The law explains what the database is gonna be, which sounds awfully rapid. I hope they can succeed this if it passes, but I'm worried. Okay, so the first one, 2A, firmware design, integration of a firearm's blueprint detection algorithm directly into a three-dimensional printer's firmware, such that any geometric code received by the printer must be screened by the algorithm before the printer will proceed to print, and such that the printer will reject print jobs identified by the algorithm as directing the printer to print firearms or legal firearm parts. Now, what is my issue here? First of all, the way this proposition, this part of the bill talks, you are gonna have something that's into your, let's say, your motherboard, that's gonna do this compare and contrast. Now, especially with legacy equipment, you may not have the processing capability to do this compare and contrast rapidly. In large files, this may take a while. If you have a STL, for instance, that has a particularly high number of triangles, you may have noticed that even in a good PC, sometimes it can take a few seconds to slice it. Now imagine I load in my G code, I load it onto my printer, and then it does a compare and contrast with a database that is local. That's another kind of worms, to run through thousands potential designs to try to identify which is which. Now, I don't know exactly how the compare is going to happen. Hopefully, there is a much smarter way to do that. But I do not know if most printers have the ability to locally run complicated software like that. The alternative could be something like a hardware solution that uploads your stuff to some kind of cloud service to compare and contrast. But then you have how long is the upload speed, depending on the size of your file. That can be quite a lot. You have issues with IP protection. If I'm making prototypes, I may want to reduce effectively the possibility of prototype leaking to zero. When I did some things for a company as test parts they wanted for a customer of them, one of the things that they asked me is that I shouldn't send the files through the cloud or through the cloud. That's actually was a stipulation from the client. Now at that time I did it pro bono for them to test because they wanted to buy this printer, and I did that as a test print for them. But imagine a situation in which this gets leaked. Who gets to be blamed? Do I get to be blamed? Do the small company get to be blamed? Because this could create vulnerabilities. And if someone has an IP that they do not want it to be leaked, they have right to. Now, if this is a software that runs 24/7, you could be having some kind of non-local service having to do thousands upon thousands comparisons on an hour basis. How expensive is that gonna be computation wise? And if you have some kind of local storage space, like a hard drive that has all those to compare with files, this has multiple issues in the sense that how big is that storage space going to be depending on the size of that local storage area. That's going to need to be quite a lot. And to prevent the dissemination of firearm STLs and um, assorted illicit designs, you're gonna then install hardware that could be reverse engineered to have all those files be accessible. I don't know how this is gonna. I hope I'm being too nitpicky here. I really do, because this could be a massive issue. And again, the issues keep on piling up. Let's go to B, integrated preprint software design. That's a little bit with C as well. And what does that do? Let's read B and C together. Integrated preprint software design, limitations of a three-dimensional printer's operation to accept geometry code of printing exclusively from a single slicer or other preprint software, which may be the manufacturer's proprietary software, and integration of a firearms blueprint detection algorithm into that preprint software, such that any stereolithography file or other computer-aided design file must be screened by the algorithm before the software will proceed to produce geometric code, and such that the software will not produce geometric code for files that are identified by the algorithm as directing the printer to print firearms or illegal firearm parts. Or C, handshake authentication design, which is the most reasonable, by the way. Limitation of a three-dimensional printer's operation to accept geometric code for printing only from specified slicers or other preprint software, when the printer will require a digital watermark or other authentication tool verifying the identity of the preprint software, and only if that preprint software has integrated a firearms blueprint detection algorithm qualified by the Attorney General under subsection 4 of this section, such that any STL file or other computer-aided design CAD files must be screened by the algorithm before the software will proceed to produce geometric code, and such that the software will not produce geometric code for files that are identified by the algorithm as directing the printer to print firearms or illegal firearm parts. Now, if there is significant software demand, it's complicated. Let's say your slicer has to connect to some kind of cloud service to do this kind of work. This is going to create a gatekeeping situation in which you have to go through certain slicers that can take the legal burden and the technical burden, the cost really, of being compliant. Now, you want slicers and hardware manufacturers to compete. We want that because competition means we have innovation and we have prices that are reasonable. We do not have printers that cost 10,000 euros and are worse than old stock. So we can have good prices for good capabilities. The way this could work is it's going to create a burden, a financial burden, so that only really large companies can survive. Because also there are so many free slicers, you may end up having to either kill free slicers or have only paid options, which also creates the problem that you could be inadvertently vertically integrating companies. A lot of companies have hardware and they also have software. Now, if I'm a hardware manufacturer, maybe I do not want to have my hardware go through their software for various reasons. What happens if they charge me a very high fee to effectively kill me from using the service? I may have to either pay the fee, I may have to go to accept limited capabilities. Maybe their slicer is strict to not really produce such high quality stuff for my machines. There could be any number of things. When you are creating a framework by which people have to go through certain individuals and private companies, you could be creating non-competitive environments simply because those companies have an avenue to, other than creating a superior product for a superior price, to do something else and beat their competition. Now, the only somewhat reasonable design is some kind of handshake authentication. So the slicer version on my PC is connected to my printer, but even that would require that at the very least my printer signals my slicer that yes, there was an unbroken chain of custody and you can print it. This is the least expensive one of those selections. Hopefully this is some kind of architecture like this is gonna take place. If this gets passed, this is the only way I see this making financial sense. But this doesn't really fix the legacy stock cost. Again, you're gonna have to have recalls, and those costs should be shouldered by the government. And if you think about DUI machines that have a lot of attached stuff with them, you probably would have to have some kind of a list here, a table which tells you what's the cost of your printer if they want to buy back all stock. So 7, so we go to, to 3. Paragraph 3. A software controls process may also be integrated into a third-dimensional printer's functions using a different design form than those described in subsection 2 of this section, provided that the software controls process both rejects print requests for firearms or illegal firearm parts with a high degree of reliability and is no less resistant to being defeated by a user with significant technical skill than the design form described in subsection 2. My issue here is we do not have a fixed number. We do not know what they expect. Depending on the process, you can have deviations in the performance that can be quite important. And because you can have those deviations, not just is the software successful, if it fails and due to the volume of people who slice on a daily basis stuff, there's going to be quite a lot of failures and quite a lot of time and effort to try to find how to correct this failure or how to work around this. And I'm not suggesting that they are being illegal. I'm suggesting that this is a false positive. This is the case, and you're gonna have them depending on how precisely your software. They are describing a process, but that process has to have a numerical value for us to determine what's gonna be the weighted consequence of you having many false positives or false negatives. Because again, the subset of people who are printing illegal fire parts is significantly smaller than everyone else. But everyone else is gonna have to be dealing with those kinds of controls, and the time to take to analyze a file, the time it will take to reanalyze a file if there was a false positive, the thing that happens after you've falsely identified that this is a weapon part, they all have costs for the user and for the authorities. Because if after a flagging of a file that this is an illegal weapons part, is it going to be a mandate for the slicer to, maybe there is some kind of automatic notification to local authorities, like an almost a CRM kind of function, with the customer in this case being the police force, that notifies the authorities and says, this guy may be having a weapon. Check this out. And will those authorities have to then spend man hours to physically see a file because they may be experiencing a surge of false positives, and they have to literally go, okay, this is not a gun, this looks like a gun, but it's not a gun or a gun part. There are technical thresholds. I'm not certain that in this short and aggressive time frame can be resolved. And yeah, and the company that comes forward and says this is our solution, they do not have a fixed goal. So they may uh, end up creating a very sensitive system that has a very, very high degree of, if it is some kind of illegal thing, it's gonna get you. But it also has a very, very high positive, false positive detection error detection rate. So it's, if it gets, if you try to push a weapon, a firearm piece, it's gonna get you, but it may still get you even if it's not a weapon piece. And depending on what's the next steps, it may start causing administrative costs that are blowing out of proportion. If every time there is a positive confirmation, and the cops see 100 of them a day, and 90 of them are correct, that's okay. But if 10 of them are false, they've spent time dealing with 10 false positives. The user has spent time trying to fix this, or maybe reorient the piece to get that false positive out of their way to do their stuff. And imagine, depending on the sizes of those two categories, you may have in effect more false positives on the side of the police force than actual positive positives, just because the populations are much more different. Again, the process has to be airtight, and if it's anything but 100%, and it doesn't really block you if it's not 100% sure, it's gonna cause issues. So section B. This kinda goes into the algorithm. Here my issue is this. If you want to screen a three-dimensional printing file, whether in the form of STL or other CAD files or geometry code, this is a very demanding process, especially if you have to do this on the printer end, which I think is the stupidest arrangement. It's probably not going to happen. It's going to require a lot of processing power and a lot of time. So if you have to do this daily, that's going to add up hidden costs that are difficult to not calculate. And especially if you have to do it on your printer, this may be the next problem of increasing the cost, because if some kind of architecture requires this process to also be done on the printer end, well, good luck, guys. Your printers will have to come with memories that both can store those files for a significant portion of time, do those kinds of functions, or they will have to have ways to upload the files to an SAS, to a SaaS service, a cloud service, to do this for them. And this can get really time consuming. And if you have issues like orientation of a part can literally cause a false positive, well, you may have just waited 10 minutes for the process to end, and there is a false positive, and you have to do some change to make sure that the thing that is not a gun or a gun part gets printed because you need it. And you are gonna have to pray to God that the next time the 10-minute process of uploading, comparing it, giving it the green light, it works. And if you are a business, all those time costs add up. If you have a small 3D printing farm and you have hundreds of machinery of equipment, well, this can be quite expensive, especially if every print has to be verified. on the printer end, even if it's the same file, that can get silly quite fast, guys. Quite fast. Now here, flag any such disallowed files for rejection by a software controls process. Does this mean this is a permanent thing, or if you reorient the file, it's gonna change this? If you change the name, if you do anything really, and if you flag it, what then? Because if you just have a process that detected successfully any illegal activity, it's just not going to be reported to the authorities. Because you would conceivably want to take those people out of the streets and make sure that you prosecute them. If it's never reported, then you're not really fighting this process. You are just imposing a cost on everyone, and you are just saying, I'm going to burn everyone plus those guys, and essentially you're burning. You are doing too much damage to too many people to deal with a few problem individuals, if you even consider that as a problem. And I know Americans have complicated views on this issue. This here section, the section 7, subsection 2, is my biggest gripe with this law. Let's read it together, and maybe I'm being a little bit stupid, but let's read it together. An algorithm must use, at a minimum, a database of disallowed firearms blueprint files that have been commonly downloaded or shared on public internet forums. Okay. The algorithm must have the capacity both to detect files in its database and to actively seek to detect modified versions of those files. Okay, into, I'm assuming, other forum databases. So it's kind of a little bit of both. The Attorney General may, by rule or regulation, require that an algorithm evaluate print requests at a minimum against all files in the files database described in Section 8 of this Act. An algorithm does not need to produce a perfect success rate at detecting disallowed files to effectively serve in blocking technology, but must meet the technical standards for detections and flagging of disallowed files that are set forth in rules and regulations adopted by the Attorney General pursuant to this chapter. Now, I understand the idea that it doesn't have to be perfect to begin with. Nothing is perfect. But we need to know what are the standards. 90 to 95 to 99, depending on what the actions afterwards is a lot. And because you have a skewed situation in which most of the people do not partake into those actions, you are going to have an awful lot of people who are getting false positives and who are maybe getting into trouble, or there has to be an administrative process to deal with all those things. Again, depending on the volume of prints and the slicing functions, this can get silly quite a lot. Especially if whenever you are in your slicer level, you are slicing your STL, and that STL firstly has to be compared or somehow either uploaded or compared to some database, and the database gives the green light, and then you, hopefully that's the simplest architecture I can think of, and there is a watermark to your G code that says this has been compared. You send that G code architecture, that Z code, to your printer, and you maybe have a firmware solution that compares unique identifiers. This was controlled this day from this machine, and it couples them together, and it says, okay, let's go ahead and print this. This is the simplest architecture I can think at the time. But if you, depending on how it is introduced, this will cause a lot of time to be lost. Time is money. If you are a professional, this can be quite problematic for you. And my other biggest issue is this: you want to reduce the distribution of ghost guns and um, connected files to them, whether they're legal gun parts and whatever. And you're gonna make a database with all of them. Now, I will use an example. The bookshelf on my uh, home has about 20, 30 books. Together with the books I have on my storage area, I have about 100 plus books. That's quite a lot. If I go to my local library, I will probably find thousands to tens of thousands of books and magazines. Okay. If I go on Wikipedia or on Amazon or Google Reads, I'm gonna find million. The the complexity, the sophistication of those three levels of organization is much different. Why I say this? If I am a bad guy, an attacker, and I want to get access to those files, or I want to sell those files to the black market, what better place to try to penetrate than a database that is gathering everything from all around the place, and it is one treasure trove of all the STLs and all those files. That database is probably going to be the most sophisticated database of illegal firearm manufacturing parts in the planet. So maybe if you are a guy who wants to do some nefarious stuff, it's a pain to try to gather them from various forums and groups that may be very protective of who comes in and out, and it may be a tedious process to do this. But this is a single place that if it gets penetrated, or if there is a leak, even an unintended one, you can have massive issues. I don't know how you are gonna. This could be a major thing. So even from a technical point, just having a database that has to be interacted with thousands of times on a daily basis, whose size is going to grow over time, and whose hopefully its capabilities have to be upgraded to keep times reasonably low, it sounds insane to us. It sounds a little bit, from a technical point, too much. Now, maybe I'm being paranoid here, and I hope I am. Whether that gets passed or not, I hope I'm actually wrong in every single piece of it. I hope that I come back into this video and I'm uh, reasonably clowned at. Um, I don't think I'm gonna be fully wrong. Some of those things probably are gonna happen if this gets passed, and they're gonna be an issue. Okay. Finally, Section 8. And this is where I was talking about. This is quite a speedy process. Section 8, subsection 1. By August 1, 2026, the Attorney General shall create and maintain a database of firearms blueprint files and illegal firearm parts blueprint files, including at a minimum by conducting reasonable searches of public internet forums, so some kind of scraping, and shall maintain and update the database at least once per year, including by adding newly discovered files that enable the three-dimensional printing of firearms or illegal firearm parts. The Attorney General may consult with other government agencies and research institutions in this state to create and maintain a database of firearm blueprint files and illegal firearm parts blueprint files. Today is January 24. Now, I hope I'm wrong, but this as a database and as a process, maybe you can scrape things together relatively fast. Okay, you are the state, you have resources, you have an infinite coffer of money, but it feels that this is a very short process because it's not just scraping things together. You kind of have to have a software that will, at the very least, benchmarks what is it that you expect to see. This can be a lot. I'm not 100% certain how they're gonna do this and this is gonna be functioning. And when the way this is worded, if I was a hardware manufacturer, I might do a solution on my hardware that is just so sensitive that it does truly stop a lot, if not all of those guys, but it does also produce a massive number of false positives. If there was a number here and told us that it has to be successful 95% of the time, and this is going to be the process afterwards, you could at the very least calculate stuff, but we don't. High degree, the language here outside the strict time schedule, the timetable, every other part of this has been extremely vague and generic. And this can cause any number of pitfalls. Now, I am pro gun control. I'm a European, and some of the things I see in America happening culturally with guns, I think that they border on the not prudent. Having access to weapons from a very, very young age where you can be emotional, a teen can be very emotional. Having access to weapons where you can be mentally unstable. Having having access to guns with people who can display levels of negligence that are really unbecoming of an owner of a weapon are an issue. That's why I say a gun, it's a right, but it's also a massive responsibility. And if you are, as a person, unable to maintain that responsibility, I would probably be okay with saying maybe you do not let everyone have guns like that. Okay, if you are unstable, if you have a criminal record, if you are an underage teen, you shouldn't have access. And if your father or grandfather has a weapon, they should have ways to secure those weapons to prevent that, because things happen. Life is complicated. I think that being even somewhat lax about safety around guns is an issue. This law, however, doesn't do this. This law, it's too generic at this point, and it is too constricting on its time frame. And I am worried that is going to cause so much damage to our space for a few bad apples. And guys, if I'm going to take a stance here, if you are in a country that the act of designing and distributing weapon designs is illegal, and you are still partaking on this process, you are being you are being a special kind of fellow, whether we like it or not. That's it for me, guys. Like and subscribe if you like this video. Reshare it. If you are an American and you are in the States and I'm gonna put a link into the description. I think there's contact ways in that. I I think that raising concerns to your legislators and your bodies is a good thing to do. We should be for creating a safer society, and that's the very least the spirit of this law is that creating a safer community. But it is important that there are clear delineations on how this is going to happen, and it shouldn't be a situation that you are burning the house down to warm up your hands. You need to be there needs to be some level of reason. So that's me. I'm Thanos. Thank you guys for your time. I hope I haven't tired you. Like and subscribe, and see you around.